So we do tonight. Welcome to the first Garden Beer for 2026. Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Saint Mary of the Cross McKillop, pray for us. And servants of God, Mary Glary, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Wow, so it's kind of miraculous that God is on tonight. I think you all got the email yesterday saying Greg Sheridan had to pull out due to a health emergency. And I'm very grateful to our speaker, John Roskam, for stepping in at the last minute to fill his shoes. In fact, we had that scare yesterday, thought we might be able to go ahead, and then it was getting very close to 7:30 tonight. I was wondering, where's Johnny? He hasn't arrived yet.
I couldn't get a car park.
I gave him a call, and he said, I can't find a car park anywhere. There's no car parks out there. And I said, well, mate, that's your fault, because everyone's here at the night to hear you tonight. And he said, no, they're all here because they probably think Greg Sheridan's still speaking. And I said, no, I'm sure. Hands up if you came here for John Roskam tonight. Yeah. No way. Someone was a Greg Sheridan fan. Sorry about that. So, welcome to the first Cup of 2026. Garden Beer is an initiative of the Knights of the Southern Cross Victoria. It aims to inspire and strengthen Christians across the southeast suburbs of Melbourne and maybe beyond, by drawing on the truth, beauty and goodness of the Catholic tradition. Our speaker tonight, John Roskam, can I actually ask everyone to pray for Greg Sheridan's health? He's had a health emergency, please keep him in your prayers. John Roskam is one of Australia's leading policy commentators. He's the former Executive Director of the Institute for Public Affairs, where he remains a research fellow. He's regularly found in the pages of Australia's leading newspapers and on TV and other media, representing, I would say, common sense policies, standing up for freedom, free speech. He was one of the leading voices, I think, during the sort of crazy COVID times when governments were trampling all over people's freedoms. John was one of the people who really stood up at that time, which is something I think he can be proud of. And he's going to speak to us tonight. He's going to try and steal Greg Sheridan's thunder and speak about the same topic that Greg was going to speak on, which is how Christians can succeed in the world today. Here's John Roskam.
Thank you, John. It's great to be with you. My father was actually a knight, and I want to pay tribute also to John. And John, what you did during that time when we couldn't see our families, when churches were shut, when society was closed down, something we are still recovering from. I'm not Greg Sheridan, as John said. Greg was born in Sydney. He is a St George's supporter. I grew up in Dandenong and I grew up for the Western Bulldogs. What I thought I would do today is not talk about Greg's wonderful book, which Greg is recovering and he'll be with you soon. We hope How Christians Can Succeed Today. A wonderful book that I've read, highly recommended. It's about the pressures on Christians and especially the pressures on Catholics in our secular age when we feel sometimes prosecuted, certainly sometimes persecuted, where we feel that a commitment to truth is dismissed, we are disparaged, and when faith has no place in the public sphere. And what Greg talks about, and whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, he says, as bad as things now are now, it's not as bad as they were in 45 AD in Rome. And he goes back to the early Christians and how they grew the church. And as Greg said, as difficult as times are now, and they certainly are, the early church had no support. It was persecuted. It had very few leaders in the public space. What the early Christians did was they came together in a community and they sought solace from each other. And Greg talks very powerfully about, in this time of social media and ubiquitous news and the things that attempt to drive us apart, that sense of community with each other is very significant. And then he talks about the role of the family, and he says that's sometimes something that we lose in the community. So what I thought I would do is just tell you a little bit about myself before I begin, and then I'll talk for 20-25 minutes, and then we might have some discussion. So as I said, grew up in Dandenong. My father was a butcher. He came from the Netherlands after the Second World War. He met my mother, who came from Poland after the Second World War. They both came from religious families, except for those of you who know Dutch Catholics, they may as well be Lutherans. And
we have one down there.
And my mother's father was in the Polish army. He was captured by both the Russian army when they first invaded Poland, and then he was released when the Germans invaded. So I grew up in family of faith, of church. Went to Poland when I was little, and I was struck, this was at the age of 7 or 8, by the churches that were overflowing. They were overflowing into the streets on a Sunday morning, and we went to St. Sheridan, and most of the time it was, pretty full, and most people left after communion to get the bread on a Sunday morning. That's okay, they still do. But in Poland, the church bound the community, and of course, communism seeks to destroy the things that stand between the individual and the state, and those two things are family and faith. So I have a second cousin who was ordained by Karol Wojtyła when he was the Bishop of Krakow, and 1978 was a great year for the world, for Catholics, for Poles, the election of John Paul II, and in 1979, when JP2 came to Krakow and Poland on that first famous visit, my auntie was one of the something like 750,000 people who just sat by the road for 4 or 5 hours waiting for the Pope to arrive. And then, of course, there was the famous Mass of something like 1.5 million people the following day. So that's a little bit about me. My politics, I went to university here in Melbourne, worked for the Kennett government, worked for the Howard government. As John said, I've been writing, I've done television, been involved in education and public policy for many years. So I've seen what the public debate is like, and I've seen how quickly the role of faith has been marginalised. I've seen how quickly, and I'll say this advisedly, we have agreed to be silenced ourselves.
Amen.
Sometimes as Catholics, but I've also begun to see the resurgence, and I think of myself as someone who, having been involved in public life for now 30 or 40 years, has been someone, and I would regard myself as having mainstream Catholic views, mainstream conservative political views, but on both perspectives, I'm now the heretic. I'm now the dissident. I now stand outside the mainstream of public opinion, and I think sometimes we have to understand that is where we all are as Catholics, but that is also the opportunity to renew. It is when we are challenged, when we are threatened, that we say to ourselves, why are we doing this? Why do we believe in this? Why do I do what I do? And what I'm seeing, especially with young people, is that the meaninglessness, the deep nihilism of modern community is something that they are reacting against. And it hasn't yet happened in Australia, although it's starting to, but if you look at, for example, church attendance in the United States, and there is some debate about whether church attendance, especially in Catholic churches, has risen or simply not declined. But however interpreted, the statistics are that young people are finding their way to the faith in numbers that we haven't seen for many years. So what I wanted to do was just reflect on, I was thinking in the car as I was looking for the car park, I could just say this is a talk about what makes us special, but I might just phrase it differently in a slightly less arrogant way and say, what are the traits of people of faith in the world today? What is it that I've seen in my experiences that I think give us comfort in challenging times, that equip us for the battles of the future, and also help us find our way to God. So I've been reflecting on this since John gave me the call at 7 p.m. last night, and there's 4 or 5 traits that I want to talk about and put into perspective. I think people of faith, people in this room, have a purpose. We believe in a purpose. We seek truth. The truth leads to a search for the good. As Christians, as Catholics, we believe in redemption, and I'm going to talk about that, the idea that we are fallen, but that we can be better and our choices make us better. And finally, the idea that we have a belonging in fellowship like this, belonging in a church community or a parish, belonging to something bigger than ourselves. So, dealing with young people as I do, and the IPA has many young people's programs. I worked in education policy for many years. I've visited many schools and still go to schools. My children went through Catholic education. And I see an education system, I see a community, a society that is largely lacking in purpose. It is lacking in a mission, and it is lacking in a purpose for itself and a mission for the community. And I sum it up as something that University of Sydney developed as a marketing ploy some years ago, and the great irony of a place of knowledge developing this as a marketing ploy, I think, is rich. But University of Sydney said that believed they could attract students by saying they should unlearn everything they know. That is deeply pessimistic. It is not a vision for the future. It doesn't lead to a confidence in a world that is very challenging. And it is not, of course, as if, sadly, students attending university today learn much at all or have much knowledge at all. But to me, that's summarised, I'll use this term deliberately, the deep nihilism that pervades so much of the world today. And when you are imbued with that, and it's an attitude that's more than sceptical, it's a deeply pessimistic, negative attitude. And if you then come across someone who says, God has put me here for a purpose, I don't quite know what it is just yet, but I'm going to try and work it out and maybe he'll guide me through, that is deeply confronting. that challenges everything that you know, and it gets you to question yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons why Catholics are under the challenge that they are today, because speaking frankly, we believe we have a purpose, and that purpose is bigger than us. It is not just about self-actualization, it is about fulfilling God's purpose. And I think, that is very significant, and I hear more and more people, young people especially, saying to me, look, I'm not sure what my purpose is, but I know God will work it out for me. And that is reassuring, and that is powerful. And the challenges of youth mental health, of the social media images they're confronted by a society that doesn't give them grounding or meaning, means that young people, when they hear that they have a purpose and that they are important, that is very powerful. But of course, for those who don't believe that, that is hugely confronting. Secondly, I think we have purpose. Secondly, we seek the truth. The truth in Jesus, the truth in the church, the truth as to what is right and wrong. Again, seeking the truth is very different from the attitude that pervades today. Americans say, truth always wins out, but truth bats last. And I think that's what we have to realise. And I was struck by, I've been struck for many years, by a speech, a presentation that Pope Benedict gave to American educators in 2008. So he called together hundreds of Catholic educators from secondary schools, from universities into where was it, in Washington, and he gave a wonderful presentation, and you can find it on the web for those. Some of you might already know it. And he talked about what is special about Catholic education. And he said, it's about seeking the truth. And there's a wonderful line, God's revelation offers every generation the opportunity to discover the ultimate truth about its own life and goals of history. That is so powerful. It is about discovering for ourselves our purpose and meeting with God's help. And what then is the goal of history? And I think the idea that we seek truth is something that is hugely powerful. Then he goes on, this is our third trait. He goes on, we don't seek truth for the sake of seeking truth, as important as that is, because we seek truth to be with God. And we also, in a secular, worldly sense, we seek truth because truth leads us to the good. And truth, and as he said, truth means more than knowledge. Knowing the truth leads us to discover the good. And again, in a world where we don't know what is good. And there's good and bad, but there's also the idea of good as something that improves us and makes us closer to God. And that, again, is incredibly powerful. And in a world of moral relativism, in a world where children and young people are not provided with the boundaries of love, because when you tell someone not to do something, you're telling it out of love, to look after them and care for them, the idea that we seek a way to the good is very powerful indeed. Then he talks, and then Pope Benedict talked about something else that again strikes me, and I think it strikes me about people of faith, but also in my position at the IPA over the years and in politics, I've come across people who might not necessarily be of faith or religious, but have fought against great odds. So some of you might remember the name or know the name Peter Reid. He was a professor of physics sacked by the James Cook University for questioning climate change, or at least some of the consequences of climate change. Some of you might know of Bill Leak, the famous cartoonist of the Australian who drew a cartoon that simply highlighted the lack of father figures in Indigenous communities, and for that he was persecuted. Some of you might remember Zoe Bueller. Zoe, and talking about that terrible time of COVID, Zoe Bueller was the mum arrested in Ballarat in her pyjamas by 5 members of Victoria Police in front of her children for putting up a Facebook post about an anti-lockdown protest that in fact was legal at the time, and she put that protest up, or that notice up, because she had friends who were working from job to job, who were relying on their hourly wages, who weren't university educated and lucky enough to be public servants working from home, and she saw how their lives were being devastated, and she said that wasn't good enough, and she was arrested, and we were able to organise legal support for her, and after 2 years of legal proceedings, eventually, literally on the doorstep of the magistrate's court in Ballarat, all the charges were dropped and there was no explanation ever given. But the point, bless you, the point of Zoe Bueller, Peter Reid, Bill Leake, just to name 3 people that I've had the good fortune of being in personal contact with, by and large, no matter what happened to them, and Peter Reid was in the High Court. Peter Reid went through 3 court cases. Bill Leake was subject to 4 or 5 legal claims. They all maintained their positive attitude and their happiness because they saw that they were doing something bigger. And this is one of the themes of Greg's book, that we can all get very down and feel very negative about things. But we are not going to get through this by being negative and pessimistic and sorry for ourselves. We are going to get through this by feeling, as best as we can, cheerful, optimistic, knowing that God has a purpose for us and knowing that we are doing the very best that we can. And again, I was struck by what Pope Benedict said when he was talking about the purpose of education and inculcating this into young people, which is one of our tasks. And he said, of course, the purpose of education and the dignity of education is in inculcating the happiness of those to be educated. So for those of you with children and grandchildren in the education system, Catholic or Christian or otherwise, when was the last time you heard an educator say, and John probably does this to his students, but when was the last time you heard them say, one of our jobs is to inculcate happiness, joyfulness, optimism? And I think that the idea of the search for the truth, the search for the good, is something that gives us an amazing strength that sadly not enough in the community have, that sometimes people of faith don't have. And you don't have to be a person of faith to search for the good or to attempt to be happy, but I'd argue you're more likely to find it if you are a person of faith. So the fourth trait that I think about, that I think distinguishes Christians in the world today, and I think this has been brought to the fore in the last 10 years, is we believe in redemption. Christ died for our sins. We are fallen. We go to confession/reconciliation, I prefer the old term, to confess our sins and start again, that we have the power and the agency to be better. Now, in my world of public policy, identity politics, the evil of an idea that says you are always going to be a white oppressor, you are always going to be of a wealthy class, you are always going to be the descendants of colonialists. You can't change your race, you can't change your gender, you can't change your sexuality, and we will put you into a category forever, and you can't control anything that you do, and we will class you, not as Martin Luther said, according to your character, but according to characteristics over which you have no control and which you can't change. Now that idea of identity politics, that idea that we are all sinful regardless of anything that we have done and because of something that previous generations might have done, undermines every aspect of human agency. It undermines the idea that the world can be a better place. It undermines social cohesion, and it removes completely one of the great gifts of Christianity, which is the idea of redemption and the idea that we can be better. The idea that we can be better is intimidating. It puts a lot of pressure on us. We know when we're not being better, when we're not seeking redemption, but it gives us a choice. And it gives us agency, which is God's gift to us, and that is completely counter to the political orthodoxy of the world today in so many places, which is we are simply identities that don't have a character, that don't have a personality, that will bear the sins for our forebears. And I think part of the nihilism, part of the deep pessimism that pervades our community today, and it's reflected in the public debate, it's reflected in the streets of Melbourne on a Saturday or Sunday as young, angry people protest about the world. I think it's reflected in the political system, whereby you've seen the decline in the support for the traditional two parties. This deep cynicism, this negativity, this idea that everyone is in it for themselves rather than we are part of a community, I think does lie at the heart of the failure to identify that we can be better and we have the opportunity to renew. So I think that redemption thing is just so significant, and I think it provides hope. The final trait that I think Christians in the world today have, and I've alluded to it, is a sense of belonging. And Greg talks about in his book the sense of belonging to a church, the sense of belonging to a community, the sense of belonging to a family, whether it is a personal family or the family of the parish, or the family of the church, or the family of our motor enthusiasts club. The idea that we don't belong anymore, that we are rootless, anchorless, aimless individuals adrift at sea of the community, I think is terribly, terribly dispiriting. Politically, well, I said I'm conservative. On some things I'm quite libertarian, and I would like the government to get out of my life as much as possible. But a libertarian doesn't necessarily believe that we are meant to live and die alone. You know, we have the potential to be members of a community, to be members of a family, to be leaders, and this sense of belonging and being part of history, part of the church, part of a journey is hugely significant, because again, when you talk to young people who haven't had the benefit of faith, who haven't had the benefit of a family and love around them, in various forms, much of what they say comes down to, but where do I belong? Where do I fit? What comes before me? What comes after me? And I think there's the sense of belonging, the sense of obligation that belonging provides, the sense of responsibility, the sense of authority that belonging imposes upon us, I think is very, very significant. So those traits, our purpose, search for truth, the idea of the good, the fact that we can be redeemed, and the fact that we belong to something, are some of the traits that I think Christians have, that the Catholic Church, that us as Catholics we are lucky enough to appreciate and to have as a gift from God. And I think it's those things that have provoked some of the hostility, some of the feelings, against people of faith. Not just Christians. The Jewish community, our Jewish friends, are under levels of threat and persecution and intimidation that I would never, ever have thought I would ever experience in Australia. So my mother died last year. She was 90. As I said, she came from Poland. She was Catholic. She had many Jewish friends in Melbourne, and of course Melbourne for many years, it might still be, was the biggest location, largest location for survivors of the Holocaust. And my mother would say that she would never have thought that her friends who had survived Europe would come to Australia to see this. So in summary, we have a very heavy obligation. We have a responsibility to evangelise, we have a responsibility to search for the good, and we have a responsibility to each other and to church, and to the church and to God, to live the best life that we can, to have hope. So I'm a Western Bulldogs member. I think I saw 7 losing preliminary finals before the big one. We live in hope. That's what we are as Christians. We have faith in a better world. We have faith that we will reach God. And we share that with the world. And that's why events such as tonight are so important. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. Thank you for the opportunity to pretend to be Greg Sheridan. And as I said, when Greg does come, when he's feeling better, you'll have a wonderful presentation when he talks about how Christians can succeed today. So thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks so much, John. If anyone's got any questions, John would be happy to answer them.
That's working.
Thank you so much for the great speech. So you mentioned political identity or identity politics. My question is, because of identity politics, does that mean it removes one's personal responsibility and self-determination under identity politics? And regarding changing identities, because of this gender ideology that's happening, where a man can change to be a woman and a woman can change to be a man, wouldn't that open the door to men entering women's spaces, such as, recently there was a prison incident in Victoria, then there's sports, then there's the locker room and bathroom toilet issue. So how does one navigate one society under this changing political identity?
Well, to come to the last bit, the point about changing political identity is that when you think, whether it's gender, politics, whether it is attitudes to personal morality and responsibility, the idea that there is no anchor is absolutely disorienting. The idea that you don't know what word to say in the office today is completely disempowering, and in fact the rules of changing language, changing behaviours, are to some extent a deliberate strategy, a deliberate approach to keep us completely off balance, to not allow us to stand and know where we stand when the rules are constantly changing, when what is acceptable is constantly shifting. When we are walking always on eggshells, we can't be our best selves, we can't be honest. When we have to police our conversation with people who we thought were our friends and acquaintances, that becomes very difficult. An agenda of the left has been to politicise everything. And I've written a lot about this the idea that, well, take an easy one. Sport was once in Australia a place where rich and poor, left and right, men and women, people of, and of course, Australia for many years was a bigoted country. Catholics and Protestants could come together and cheer or boo the teams, where politics and ideology and identity was left at the door and we could all share a common experience. The idea now that if we follow the AFL, we have to accede to the woke agenda, that we have rounds for some things but not other things, is part of that attempt to make us groundless and uncertain. And to come to your point about identity politics denying us agency, exactly. The identity politic, I'll take myself as an older white male Christian. As an older white male Christian, identity politics doesn't give me the opportunity to be good or bad. It doesn't allow me to express my character. It doesn't allow me to be better than I am. I am forever in the world of identity politics, the old Christian white man. All of that entails. Exactly. Kevin is exactly right, and Kevin's not that. So, but on the other hand, we know what's true. We know that ultimately God judges us not by who we are, but by what we do. And that's significant, and I think that gives us hope for the future.
Just for the record, I lived 68 years. I was brought up and lived in Canberra.
I'm sorry. That's not identity politics. I'm judging you as a Canberran.
I'm a Canberra's tragic. There you go. I thought Sheridan was going to be here tonight, Greg, and I wrote a question out for him some time ago because I have a lot of respect for him. And I've watched him so many times on Insiders, and I've read his columns in the newspaper and some of his writings. And he's a devoted Catholic, there's no doubt about that. And I have a problem. So I was going to ask him about my problem, but you're Greg Sheridan tonight, so I'll ask you. I'm a Catholic man, and I believe in one God. I believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Creed is the essence of my life. And my immediate concern is the embedding of First Nations people's beliefs in our lives. All the correspondence that I receive, every bill, every organisation or letter from Parliament down to St. Benny's have a statement about First Nations people. Their elders, past, present and future. And it leads on to, the football, where you have the welcome to country at the football. And it leads to smoking ceremonies, the promotion of snakes, the rainbow serpent. Since 1990 onwards, there has been a significant call to drop our Father from Australian parliaments. And not surprisingly, the ACT Assembly dropped the Our Father in 1995. And on the other hand, there have been calls to include acknowledgement of country. And again, the ACT Legislative Assembly introduced this in 2002. And today, the ACT Legislative Assembly recites the welcome to country, the acknowledgement to country in the Ngunnawal language. What's the question? Yeah. I know of some Catholic groups who have included a First Nation people acknowledgement in their meetings, their opening prayers. I've experienced this before Mass, especially children's school masses, in my own, up in Holy Spirit, up in North England. And at the beginning of funerals, you can have a smoking ceremony, everybody, at your wedding or at your funeral. So my question to you is, in this embedding of First Nations ideals, is it being done to affect our beliefs? Is it an intentional wedge against us? Who's driving it? Who are the major actors? Is it overdone? And at the end of the day, where do you think it should or will all end up? And to me, the question is, how can Christians succeed in the world today? And I just think the First Nation question is so relevant.
I'm deeply uncomfortable with acknowledgements to country because Australia belongs to us all. Whether we are here for one, whether we've been here for 1 or 2 generations, or hundreds of generations. And I feel deeply uncomfortable when I see acknowledgements to country and smoking ceremonies before Mass. I think what has happened is that in the effort to be respectful and understanding of Indigenous Australians, we have either deliberately or not succeeded in dividing Australians. And what's significant about acknowledgement to country is that by and large Australians in appropriate circumstances don't object to the acknowledgement to country. But for example, when the Institute of Public Affairs, we did a big poll of Australians, the mainstream opinion is that 70% of Australians think it's overdone. I was there at the press club during the Voice debate during the referendum campaign in 2023 when a great Australian, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, was asked about these issues and about the impact of colonisation on intergenerational suffering. And she said, paraphrasing but not by much, European civilisation coming to Australia was a benefit for Indigenous Australians. Yeah. And you could have heard a pin drop when she said that, and then there was a collective gasping of air, and then the room erupted. And she said, no, I believe that. If we look at food, if we look at water, if we look at how women were treated, if we look at democracy, certainly bad things have happened, but overwhelmingly Western civilisation in Australia and the world has been a good thing. Again, through the IPA program, we do a lot of work with schools and we see what our young people are being taught. Take an easy one, slavery and colonisation, which is not completely disconnected to the idea of welcomes to country and acknowledgement to country. So young people are taught that slavery was a uniquely Western concept. It certainly is not. It has been around in basically every civilisation and society since the beginning of time. But it was English Christians who fought for the end of slavery, first the end of the slave trade in 1807, and then the end of slavery in the British colonies in the 1830s. 600,000 Americans lost their lives in a war to end slavery. The heroes of the end of slavery were Christian. They were absolutely motivated by the idea that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor master in the eyes of God. So William Lloyd Garrison, the great American abolitionist who for 40 years published once a week a newspaper called The Liberator. He started in the 1830s, 30 years before the American Civil War, and he said, we are not going to negotiate on slavery. Slavery is bad all the time, everywhere. It must be abolished today. And even people like Abraham Lincoln would say, well, you know, it's going to take time and maybe we should emancipate and manumit slaves gradually and gently. And he said, no, slavery is wrong everywhere, every time. And every single speech he made was grounded in the Bible. Every single speech. So the power of Christianity, the power of belief was hugely significant, important. So that's a long way away from the question about the acknowledgement to country, but I think over time Australians are going to, as they are now, are growing tired of it. They understand that it's often meaningless, it's performative, and that it might be, in some circumstances, it might be appropriate, but by and large, in nearly all of the circumstances that it's used in today, it's inappropriate. And in fact, it divides us.
Thanks, John. I note your comments on the blog, I suppose, about the good heart thesis of 2017 about somewhere people and anywhere people. I'd say that this is a consequence of globalism from 1990 onwards. But my question is, what do you think would be a positive response to these developments? And secondly, Catholic Social Teaching published last 2024 a book called Localism, mostly American favoured, I think, distributism. But that would be a one response to this problem. Thanks, John.
Oh no, thank you. So I, as a conservative, as a libertarian, sometimes as an economic liberal, I think we need to understand what the consequences of the world financial system are that we have created. I think Marx was right in his understanding that capitalism was a force that erodes and removes and dissolves and evaporates all things before it. And I think that means we must discover meaning for ourselves, and that a lot of the meaning that we search for, the belonging we search for, we have allowed to be contracted out, we have left to the market. And as an economic liberal, I believe that ultimately the market is nothing but the individuals and the groups in that market. I think, again, speaking of Catholic education, I see too often parents contracting out and allowing the Catholic schools and Catholic teachers to effectively bring up children in their faith. I think we have to understand the role of the decline. Sorry?
They don't.
They don't, well indeed. They don't, or in fact, they come out positively hostile to the church.
Backing against the real thing.
And again, one of the strengths of Greg's book, to come to your question about globalism and globalisation, is the role of the family. Yes. So again, you have more people looking at what is happening in Europe, people like Orban in Hungary, understanding that the government can just as easily erode the family as build the family. And I think one of the responses to the economic changes of the last 20 or 30 years has been to commodify child rearing. And I think it's exciting now that you have alternatives to the commodified, industrialised child rearing that the left want to impose on young people. I think you have a tax system that discriminates against families and people staying together. And I think that one of the things that I'm starting to see, which I think is really optimistic and positive, is the discussion of the family as a tax unit and the understanding that the government should support the choices of families. And if the mother or the father wants to stay at home and perform their most important duty, which is to bring up their children, the government should support that, and we as a community should support that to the very best of our ability.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much for the talk. So you said you're an economic liberal and partly like gay, and I've got a few thoughts to preface the question with first. So I think it was Pope Pius IX came out incredibly strongly against liberalism, and we can see that liberalism here in Australia is the right, liberalism in America is the left. So it goes back to this idea of classical liberalism that the individual liberation is the greatest good. But so then I guess my question is, in your experience in these more conservative liberal movements, do people understand that it is the dissolving force of liberalism? It's an anti-cultural force that has led to globalism on one hand, and socialism and Nazism, and all of the isms that have replaced Catholic social teaching and Catholic, just in general, Christian teaching. I guess that's kind of the question of, if you could just comment on those thoughts and if there's any movement towards, I guess, a post-liberal discussion in more of the conservative liberal movements, because I feel like if we just keep applying more liberalism to the issue, we're just going to continue to dissolve everything that holds culture together. If that makes sense. No,
it does. I think John should schedule a special 4-hour discussion about Patrick Deneen and Rusty Reno. And exactly this question. So if I can just paraphrase a little bit, this is I gave a talk about this actually to some young people a couple of weeks ago. This is a really interesting debate now in America, in political circles, in religious circles. Exactly. So what's your name? James.
Yeah.
So exactly as James identified, that liberalism, the idea that we make our own truth. Well, let me begin without answering this in 20 minutes. The idea of liberalism, in a political sense, that a political system should work for the person, for an individual, not for a king, not for a community necessarily, not for a tribe, but that an individual has God-given rights. We have freedoms and we have responsibilities which the state should abridge as narrowly as possible, I think is one of the great gifts of Western civilization. And George Pell gave a wonderful speech about liberalism in that sense and the individual and what that meant. The downsides of liberalism is that if we are all to decide our own rules, our own morality, if political action is only about self-actualisation, there is nothing to bind us together. There is no sense of community, there's no sense of tradition or convention, and that gives us the rootlessness and the aimlessness that we suffer from today. And people like Karl Popper, the Viennese Jewish philosopher, said ultimately that will give us fascism because someone is going to take advantage of that rootlessness and give us nationalism and give us a purpose and give us a meaning, and that is not a very good thing. So the reaction against that, post-1945, was the rules-based international order, political liberalism as understood, and it also meant largely the erosion of democracy because people like belonging to things, and the view was, especially in the European Union, that you can't trust people with democracy, and the European Union is still suffering from that today. What is happening now is people like Patrick Deneen at Notre Dame, Rusty Reno, who's the editor of First Things, both, of course, Catholics, have talked about, I'd call it rebalancing liberalism and understanding that liberalism as a political process that gives me rights, that doesn't allow me to be thrown in jail at the whim of the king, and that gives me trial by jury and gives me freedom of speech, and freedom of religion is a good thing, but that it has to be bounded by tradition, by family, by convention, and I think this is going to be a really interesting debate. And for those of you who are interested in this discussion, of course, there's Patrick Deneen and his liberalism book, and a book that I found very influential, Rusty Reno's book, The Return of Strong Gods, and that came out a few years ago. And he basically said that after the Second World War, religion was banished, nationality was banished, family was banished, because that gave us the horrors of the Second World War. And in fact, they're strong gods and they are part of our belonging. And he also significantly said truth was banished as well. And he said and he went back and he said we have to re-establish truth, the search for the good, and a sense of belonging, because he points out where we've got to right now in a liberal world is absolutely not ideal. So I highly recommend. R. Reno is his name. It's a wonderful, wonderful, important book.
One more question.
I'm not exactly sure how to frame the question, but it's specifically, maybe it speaks to the issues we have in our society now. Is I'm frankly appalled with the demonstrations that's been ongoing in the city. It's become very clear that it's not about pro-Gaza, it's anti-Israel. Because the same demonstrators go to all different demonstrations. They go to the Extinction Rebellion, we see them at all the different demos. None of them turned up at the Iranian rallies. Tens of thousands of Iranians were killed by their own people. None of them turned up. It's about Israel. How do we as Christians respond to the clear anti-Semitism that is occurring in our communities? Because when they are calling out from the rivers of the sea, they are saying, we'll wipe out Israel. How do we deal with that? Because they've existed for 80 years. Okay, America's been there 250 years. Yes, is Israel a perfect state? It's not. It's for Jewish people. It's for a lot of Arabs and different people. It is the only democracy in the Middle East. The only one where people can live freely, where gay and lesbian people can live freely. And yet people are demonstrating on the streets here to destroy the one state that's free. How do we as Christians respond to this? How do we do it?
I used to be on ABC Radio once a fortnight with John Fane when he had the morning program, and I was on with my friend Sally Warhaft. She was on the left, I was normally on the right, and these topics would come up often. And I remember I said one day, and I can't remember whether it was the mayor of Israel, the mayor of Tel Aviv, I think it might have been the mayor of Tel Aviv was gay. And I said, I don't know, are there any other Middle East countries where the mayor of a major city is gay? And the phones didn't stop ringing off the hook for half an hour. I think you're right about what the protests are. They're not just anti-Israel, they're anti-Semitic, and I think as Christians it's our responsibility to be Christian Zionists. I am. And to stand with our Jewish brothers, and at every opportunity to take the chance to communicate what we think about this to decision makers, to the people that we know in business, in politics, in our workplace. I think that is hugely significant. I think we have to understand this is a tiny proportion of the community, but it is a very loud and vocal and committed proportion of the community, and that mainstream Australians do not share these views, and that we have to take every opportunity to express what we think about these things. And that, it's again interesting for me in politics. In the good old days, if you wanted to express a view to an MP, you'd ring up the member's office and you complain to their elected officer or say the MP did something nice. These days what you do, and I've seen this over the last few months, you get on their social media page. You get on their Facebook account or their Instagram account and you say, why aren't you standing up on this issue? Why aren't you doing that? And I think what is exciting about the world at the moment, for all the challenges that we face, is the new media, social media for all of its ills, does equip all of us to participate in a particular debate, and in debates in a way we couldn't before. So as I said, I was on the ABC years ago, I was on 10 years ago when I was on, it was rating twice what it is now. The prevalence of podcasts, of alternative news sites, of things like Substack has meant that we can express our views in many different ways. And interestingly, many of those new outlets are Christian and they are Catholic in a way that we did not ever see in the legacy media. So I think it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard, but I think Australians are now coming to see the meaning of what those protests are, and how our social cohesion is frayed, and that how governments and all of us of all persuasions have to talk about what unites, and it's corny but it's true, what unites us Acknowledgement to country does not unite us. The voice referendum did not unite us. A Prime Minister standing in front of 3 flags does not unite us. Australia is the country with one of the highest rates of migration in the developed world, and for as long as that continues, my parents were migrants, but they came and they were expected to assimilate and to become Australians first and foremost. It's not about abandoning your heritage, but it's about being Australian first and being part of the community first.
John, that was fantastic. Thank you. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. I really loved how you got us to think about what makes being Catholic special, especially in Catholic education, seeking the truth because it leads us to the good. I was actually just talking to my daughter about this the other night. That as Christians, we're not interested in just going along with whatever's popular in the world today. Going along with whatever's trendy or fashionable, whatever's going to make life easiest for us. That's not what Christians are about. We're interested in the truth because we think that will lead us to God and the truth will set us free. So I really loved your emphasis on that. And I especially, loved your suggestion that we do an in-depth, was it 4-hour discussion on the question that James raised about sort of liberalism and post-liberalism. What's the future for Christianity? Because it does seem like the future kind of looks grim. It looks bleak. It's hard to feel optimistic based on the trends. So exploring avenues that might lead to renewal and revival of faith is definitely something worth looking at. I'd love to talk to you more about that. You mentioned Patrick Deneen. I'm actually trying to get him to come out to Australia. That would be pretty interesting. I'd love to put you two together. Just a few quick announcements. If you'd like to, God is a free event, so there's no obligation to pay anything, but if you'd like to support the event, help us to thank our speaker and help us to pay our other costs, there's some donation buckets coming around now. My girls are going to bring donation buckets around, and anything you can donate is greatly appreciated. We've got another God and Beer coming up in a month's time. Father Brendan Arthur, who's the former parish priest of Dandenong North. He's going to speak on the social reign of Christ the King. So I think that might even touch on some of these questions, some of these issues about what's the role of Christianity in the public square. And that'll be on Monday the 16th of March. I wanted to mention an event that's coming up. I'm sorry I don't have a slide for it, but the Catholic Women's League is holding a Mass and then a public talk at St. Patrick's Cathedral and then a public talk at Australian Catholic University on the 13th of March. Did I get that right? The date? Where is it? Yeah, I think it's the 13th of March, Friday night. Really recommend it. I think there'll be a huge crowd there for that, a full cathedral and then a full Cathedral Hall at Australian Catholic University, the 13th of March. Is that right, Lisa?
It is. What's the topic?
It's about Mary Glowry. So, did I not mention that? It's about Mary Glowry. So she's recently been declared a servant of God, possibly on the path to canonisation. And you get to find out more about her amazing life and contributions to Australia. We've got some other notices. Knights of the Southern Cross, come and talk to Andrew or Jerry.
Lawrence.
If you'd like to know more about the Knights of the Southern Cross, it's an awesome organisation. Really wonderful way to live out your faith, strengthen your faith, find Christian brotherhood. Come and talk to us if you're interested in joining the Knights of the Southern Cross. We thank the Catholic Development Fund for supporting God Here. They have an offer which you can see on the screen here. Mostly a lot of what they do is supporting parishes and schools, Catholic parishes and Catholic schools, but they can also help with personal banking as well. They've got a good offer there. Make sure you follow God and Beer on social media. Andrew does a great job recording the talks and putting them on all these different platforms, so have a look and share them with your friends, let other people know. And thanks everyone for coming.